Admiral Ross stood in the observation chamber of the Starseeker, gazing at the colossal derelict fleet stretching across the void. These ancient vessels dwarfed his own flagship, their sheer size and number intimidating even the seasoned officer. The darkness of space rendered the ship's massive, angular forms almost invisible, save for the faint glint of distant starlight on their hulls. Around him, the Starseeker's bridge hummed with activity as officers and researchers scrambled to interpret the readings pouring in. "Preliminary scans complete, Admiral," announced First Officer Wilson, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "The fleet spans roughly 3 light hours and consists of over 300 capital ships. Most are heavily shielded against physical deterioration. Carbon dating puts them at around 50,000 years old." Ross nodded, his gaze unwavering. He'd seen countless remnants of extinct civilizations in his role as head of the Galactic Council's archaeological division. Some were grand, others mysterious, but none had amounted to more than scattered relics of failed attempts to reach the stars. He doubted this fleet would be any different. "Technological assessment?" Ross asked, breaking the heavy silence. Wilson hesitated before replying. "Primitive by our standards. No evidence of quantum shielding, neural interfaces, or advanced AI systems. The ships rely on basic fusion drives and kinetic weaponry." Ross allowed himself a slight smirk. An impressive find, but not the groundbreaking discovery some were hoping for. Just another relic of a race that didn't make it. Despite his dismissive tone, a quiet unease stirred within him. The arrangement of the fleet, precise, deliberate, hinted at purpose rather than chaos. Still, he brushed aside the thought. Whatever purpose these ships once served was irrelevant now. Over the next few days, the survey team worked tirelessly to map the fleet. Researchers moved methodically from ship to ship, documenting every detail. Their findings only deepened the mystery. The ships were arranged like chess pieces on a cosmic board, their weapons systems seemingly designed to face inward as much as outward. Massive hangars sat empty, and peculiar devices lined the corridors, their function defying modern analysis. It was on the flagship of the ancient fleet that Dr. Lee, a junior researcher, made the first truly strange discovery. She called Ross to the site, her voice betraying a mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Admiral, you need to see this," she said as he arrived. Ross followed her into the ship's central corridor, where she pointed to a series of markings etched into the hull. They were crude by modern standards, but carried a deliberate weight. "They're repeated across multiple ships," Lee explained. "I think they're some kind of warning." Ross studied the symbols, his antenna twitching with unease. "Can you translate them?" Lee shook her head. "Most are too degraded, but this section is clear enough." She motioned to a partially preserved panel. The translation displayed on her scanner read, "In case of galactic emergency, wake the Guardians." Ross frowned. Superstitious nonsense. Primitive races often left warnings like this to exaggerate their importance to future generations. Lee hesitated, her brow furrowed. "But sir, the engineering principles of these ships are unlike anything we've seen before. They might appear primitive, but their power conduits and structural integrity suggest an entirely different technological paradigm." Ross waved her concerns away. "Different doesn't mean better, Doctor. We've met dozens of species, and none have surpassed our current capabilities. Whatever these ships were meant for, they failed." Yet as Ross left the ancient flagship, an inexplicable chill ran down his spine. The derelict vessels loomed like sleeping giants, their true purpose obscured by time. Tom Harker moved cautiously through the labyrinthine corridors of the flagship. Unlike most of his colleagues, who saw the derelict fleet as a glorified museum piece, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the ships held a deeper significance. There was purpose here, something forgotten but not lost. Log entry 47. He spoke into his personal recorder. Warning markers are scattered throughout the vessel. Their placement suggests a deliberate design rather than random decay. His light swept over more symbols etched into the walls, revealing subtle patterns that seemed to tell a fragmented story. He paused, running his fingers over the carvings. "What were you warning us about?" he muttered. "Hey, Tom!" a voice called from behind. Jack, a fellow researcher, approached with a mix of urgency and excitement. "You'll want to see this." Found something weird in Section 7. They hurried to the designated area, where a wall panel stood out from its surroundings. Unlike the crude carvings elsewhere, this one was pristine, encased in a transparent material that had resisted time's ravages. Jack gestured to the preserved inscription. Tom's heart raced as he read aloud, "To those who find this fleet, we built these ships not for war, but for protection. When the darkness comes from beyond the edge, wake us. We will stand guard again." Jack shifted uneasily. "That's specific." Tom nodded, his mind racing. "It's not just a warning. It's an instruction." Back aboard the Starseeker, Admiral Ross was less than impressed when Tom presented the findings. "More superstitious nonsense," Ross said, dismissing the inscription with a wave. "These warnings are nothing more than the delusions of a dying species." "But sir," Tom argued, "we've found similar warnings on every ship we've examined. They're consistent. And the materials protecting these inscriptions, our sensors can't even identify them." This wasn't random. Ross's antenna twitched in irritation. "Need I remind you, Mr. Harker, that we have mapped 87% of the galaxy? If there were a threat from beyond the edge, we'd know about it." But Tom couldn't shake his conviction. That night, he and Jack returned to the flagship under the cover of darkness. They had noticed something peculiar about the panel in Section 7. It seemed to react faintly to certain light frequencies. "Try ultraviolet," Jack suggested. Tom adjusted his scanner, and the panel flared to life. Glowing symbols appeared, forming a sequence. "It's some kind of activation code," Tom whispered. Awestruck.as they watched. A low hum reverberated through the ship. The walls seemed to pulse, and distant machinery stirred. Back on the Starseeker, alarms blared. "Unknown energy signature detected in derelict vessel," the ship's AI announced. "Shut it down," Jack urged, panic in his voice. "Ross will have our heads." "It's too late," Tom replied, his eyes fixed on the glowing panel. The activation sequence had already begun. Somewhere deep within the ancient fleet, systems that had lain dormant for 50 millennia began to awaken. The silent giants were stirring. The Starseeker's bridge descended into chaos as the alarms pierced through the hum of ordinary operations. Admiral Ross barked commands, trying to regain control of his ship's systems. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, turning to First Officer Wilson. "Massive energy readings across the fleet, sir," Wilson replied, frantically scanning his console. "Several ships are powering up. We're detecting fusion reactor activity levels far beyond what should be possible with their technology." Ross's antenna twitched violently. "This is no coincidence. Who authorized activation protocols?" Before Wilson could respond, the communications officer interrupted. "Sir, we're receiving a signal. It's coming directly from the flagship of the derelict fleet." Ross's gaze snapped to her. "Play it." The bridge fell silent as the message began. A deep, resonant voice, mechanical, yet almost human, filled the air. "To those who awaken us, identify yourself and state your purpose. The Guardians exist to defend, but their power must be wielded with care." The darkness stirs once more. Ross clenched his fists. "What kind of darkness are they talking about?" "Unknown, sir," Wilson replied. "But whatever we've triggered, it's spreading. More ships are activating. Weapon systems are powering online, directed inward, just like their original arrangement." Ross turned to the tactical officer. "Are they targeting us?" The officer shook his head, his face pale. "No, sir. It's like they're targeting each other." Back aboard the ancient flagship, Tom and Jack watched in awe as the corridors around them lit up with pulsing light. The activation sequence they had triggered was far beyond anything they'd anticipated. "This isn't just a fleet," Tom said, his voice trembling. "It's a network." "What do you mean?" Jack asked, his tone edged with panic. Tom gestured toward the glowing walls. "Look at the patterns, they're forming connections, like synapses in a brain. These ships aren't independent. They're part of a larger system." Jack glanced nervously down the corridor. "A system for what?" Before Tom could respond, a deep rumble echoed through the ship. The floor beneath them vibrated as ancient machinery roared to life. A nearby console sprang into existence, its surface covered in glowing alien glyphs. Tom approached cautiously, his scanner buzzing with frantic activity. This interface. It's reading us. It's adapting. As he reached out to touch the console, a voice different from the one heard on the Starseeker emanated from the walls. You have awakened the Guardians. State your identity and purpose, or face containment. Tom froze, unsure how to respond. We're explorers, he said finally, his voice steady despite the rising fear. We found your fleet and activated the sequence by accident. The voice paused, as if processing his words. Then, it replied, Explorers. Your kind has reached the precipice before. Do you understand the stakes? Tom exchanged a look with Jack. What stakes? The walls pulsed brighter, and the voice grew harsher. The Harbingers. They come from beyond the galactic veil. We were forged to hold them back. If you've awoken us, they have returned. On the Starseeker, Ross paced furiously. Send a transmission to the Council. They need to know what's happening here. Sir, Wilson interjected, the flagship's energy output is escalating. It's disrupting our comms and sensor arrays. Ross slammed his hand against the nearest console. Then boost the signal. I want every ship in this sector alerted. If this fleet is some kind of weapon, we need to control it before he could finish. The Starseeker lurched violently. The bridge crew struggled to steady themselves as a blinding light erupted from the derelict fleet. One of the massive ships, a towering dreadnought, shifted its position, aligning itself toward a distant point in space. Admiral, the tactical officer shouted. One of the ships just fired a projectile. Its trajectory. It's leaving the galaxy. Ross's eyes widened. What are they shooting at? Wilson's face turned ashen as he read the data. Sir, the projectile is carrying an energy signature unlike anything we've ever encountered. If I'm reading this correctly, it's some kind of beacon. They're signaling something. Ross's voice dropped to a near whisper. Or someone. On the flagship, Tom and Jack watched as the console displayed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. At its edges, a dark void pulsed ominously, tendrils of shadow creeping inward. This is what they were warning about, Tom said, his voice heavy with realization. The darkness from beyond the edge, it's real. The voice returned, now calmer but no less commanding. The Harbingers consume all. We held them back for eons, but we fell into slumber when the threat receded. Now, the balance shifts once more. Tom stared at the map, his mind racing. What do we do? How do we stop them? The voice responded, You are not ready. But you can learn. The Guardians will stand with you, but only if you prove worthy of the burden we bear. As the console dimmed, a new sequence of glyphs appeared. Tom recognized them as coordinates, ones that led deep into uncharted space. What's at these coordinates? He asked. The key to unlocking the Guardian's full strength, the voice replied. But be warned, awakening us comes with a price. The Harbingers will see your light, and they will come. Jack stepped back, his face pale. We've just painted a target on ourselves, haven't we? Tom nodded grimly. It's not just us. It's the whole galaxy. As the flagship's systems hummed with renewed life, Tom knew there was no turning back. The silent giants were awake, and with them, a war older than the stars themselves had begun anew. The Starseeker hung in orbit, silent and tense. The activation of the ancient fleet had sent shockwaves, both figurative and literal, through the team aboard. Systems across the derelict ships were beginning to hum with life. Long deadlights flickered on, illuminating corridors that had not seen movement for 50,000 years. Admiral Ross stood on the bridge watching the chaos unfold. On the main display, energy signatures cascaded across the grid as the derelict ships powered up. The sensors struggled to keep up. Admiral, the energy output is rising exponentially, shouted First Officer Wilson. His usual calm tone had given way to urgency. If these readings are accurate, each ship's reactor is outputting the equivalent of a Type 5 star? Ross's antenna twitched as he processed the information. Are you saying this fleet could outpower our entire sector? Yes, sir. And their systems are still calibrating. Before Ross could respond, an alert flashed across the screen. Admiral, the ship's AI interrupted, its voice steady but firm. New object detected at the fleet's outer perimeter. It's not one of ours. On screen, Ross ordered. The display shifted to show a single, angular vessel hovering just beyond the edge of the derelict fleet. Its hull was jet black, absorbing the surrounding starlight like a void. It was massive, far larger than even the largest of the derelict ships. Identify, Ross commanded. The AI hesitated for the first time Ross could remember. Unable to classify. The ship is emitting no recognizable energy signature. However, its size and composition suggest an origin outside known galactic boundaries. Ross's stomach tightened. Open a channel. There's no response, sir, Wilson said after a moment. But, he hesitated. But what? The ship is scanning us. Ross turned back to the screen, his unease growing. The mysterious vessel floated motionless, yet the implications were clear. Tom Harker and Jack huddled in the control room of the Guardian flagship, now thrumming with activity. The activation sequence they had triggered was accelerating. Holograms danced across the walls, showing schematics of the fleet, lists of ancient protocols, and warnings in a language they couldn't fully decipher. What the hell is happening? Jack asked, his voice barely audible over the growing hum of machinery. Tom studied the holograms, his face pale but resolute. They're waking up, he said. All of them. The entire fleet. Suddenly, the holograms shifted, focusing on the black ship at the fleet's perimeter. Strange glyphs surrounded the image, but one word stood out, prominently translated by the ship's systems, Harbinger. Tom's breath caught in his throat. Jack, that's them. Who? The Harbingers. The ones they built this fleet to fight. As if in response to his words, a deep voice filled the room. It was ancient, mechanical, and layered, as though 1,000 voices spoke in unison. The time of slumber has ended. The Guardians awaken, as the edge has been breached. Tom spun around, searching for the source of the voice. It seemed to emanate from every corner of the ship. Who are you? Tom demanded. We are the Guardians. We exist to protect this galaxy from the void. The Harbingers come to consume. You have done well to awaken us. But you are not yet safe. Not yet safe? What do you mean? Before the voice could respond, the ship shuddered violently. Alarms blared, and lights flickered. Jack, what's happening? Tom shouted. Jack checked his scanner. The black ship is firing on us. Back on the Starseeker, Ross watched as a beam of light, impossibly thin and precise, lanced from the black vessel. It struck one of the derelict ships, slicing through its hull like a hot knife through butter. There was no explosion, just silence as the massive vessel was torn in two. Shields up? Ross barked. Admiral, the derelict fleet is responding, Wilson reported. The fleet began to move. Massive engines, dormant for millennia, roared to life. The ships adjusted their formation, surrounding the black vessel like hunters encircling prey. Admiral, incoming transmission from the fleet, the AI announced. On screen, Ross ordered. The face that appeared was not human. It was angular and metallic, with glowing eyes that radiated intelligence. We are the Guardians, it said. Your presence here is tolerated only because you awakened us. Leave now, and you may survive. The Harbingers are beyond your comprehension. Ross leaned forward. And if we stay? The Guardian's eyes narrowed. Then you will face the same fate as the Harbingers, annihilation. Tom and Jack braced themselves as the flagship shook again. The Guardian systems had fully activated now, and weapons were coming online. Massive cannons emerged from hidden compartments, their barrels glowing with an ominous blue light. Tom, we've got to get out of here, Jack shouted. Tom shook his head. Not yet. There's something we're missing. He turned back to the holograms, searching for answers. One image caught his attention, a map of the galaxy, overlaid with coordinates. These coordinates, Tom muttered. What about them? They're not random. They're pointing to something. A system we haven't explored yet. Before Jack could respond, the Guardian voice returned. Intruders, your knowledge is insufficient. The Harbingers have evolved. The outcome is uncertain. Retrieve the coordinates and bring them to your leaders. Only then will you understand. The hologram shifted, displaying the coordinates in full. Tom quickly copied them to his scanner. We've got what we need, he said. Let's move. As they ran back to their shuttle, the derelict fleet fired its first volley at the Harbinger vessel. Beams of energy and kinetic projectiles streaked through space, illuminating the void in a dazzling display of power. The black ship retaliated, its weapons carving through the Guardians with terrifying precision. For the first time in 50,000 years, war had returned to the galaxy. The Starseeker shook violently as the exchange between the ancient fleet and the Harbinger vessel escalated. Energy beams sliced through space, detonating with blinding flashes, and massive shockwaves rattled even the heavily shielded flagship. Admiral Ross gripped the command console, his voice cutting through the chaos. Status report. Shields holding at 72%, but energy readings are off the scale. First Officer Wilson shouted over the din. Admiral, the Guardians' fleet is reorganizing into a defensive formation. Whatever this Harbinger is, they're treating it as a direct threat. Ross narrowed his eyes, his antenna twitching in frustration. This situation had spiraled far beyond an archaeological survey. Are we within the Harbinger's targeting range? Not yet, sir, but their weapon systems before Wilson could finish. The Harbinger vessel fired again. This time, the beam lanced straight through 3 Guardian ships, reducing them to molten debris. Yet, for every Guardian vessel destroyed, 2 more shifted into place, their movements coordinated with unnerving precision. Admiral, we've got an urgent transmission from Harker's shuttle. Put it through, Ross barked. Tom's face appeared on the display, his expression grim but resolute. Admiral, we've uncovered something critical. The Guardians provided us with coordinates, something they believe is the key to stopping the Harbingers. We need to leave now and head there. Ross frowned. You're suggesting we abandon the fleet? These ships are holding back a threat we don't even understand. With all due respect, sir, they're barely holding it back, Tom replied. If we don't act on this intel, we'll lose more than just this fleet. The entire galaxy could be at risk. Ross hesitated, weighing his options. The Guardian's fleet was staggering in its might, yet the Harbinger vessel continued to overwhelm them. Perhaps Tom was right. This battle wasn't winnable without understanding the larger threat. Wilson, plot a course to the coordinates Harker provided, Ross ordered. Admiral, if we leave now, I said plot the course. Ross snapped. Tom's shuttle docked with the Starseeker moments later, and he and Jack rushed to the bridge. As they entered, Ross turned to face them. These coordinates, Ross said, what exactly are we heading toward? Tom placed his scanner on the console, projecting a hologram of the map he'd retrieved from the Guardian flagship. The image zoomed in on a star system located far beyond the explored edge of the galaxy. This system doesn't appear on any of our charts, Tom explained. But according to the Guardian's data, it's not just a system, it's a fortress. They called it the Cradle of Light. Fortress? Ross asked, his voice skeptical. Tom nodded. The Guardians built the fleet we're seeing now as a first line of defense. But this Cradle of Light was their fallback, a last resort. Whatever's there, it was designed to stop the Harbingers permanently. Wilson looked up from his console. Admiral, the Harbinger vessel just destroyed another 15 Guardian ships. They're losing ground fast. Then we don't have time to debate, Ross said. Full speed to the coordinates. As the Starseeker accelerated away, the battle between the Guardians and the Harbinger vessel raged on. The Guardians fought with desperation, their precision giving way to sheer brute force. Explosions rippled through the void, illuminating the path of the fleeing ship. After hours of travel through uncharted space, the Starseeker dropped out of hyperspace. Before them lay a star system unlike any they had ever seen. The central star was encased in a massive structure, a latticework of shimmering material that pulsed with energy. Around it orbited countless smaller constructs, each bristling with weapons and sensors. The sheer scale of the system was overwhelming. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission," Wilson said. "It's automated." "Let's hear it." The voice that filled the bridge was similar to the one they had heard aboard the Guardian flagship, but older, heavier, as though burdened by millennia of vigilance. "Welcome to the Cradle of Light. State your purpose." Ross stepped forward. "This is Admiral Ross of the Starseeker. We were directed here by the Guardians. The Harbingers have returned." There was a pause, and then the voice returned, colder and more severe. "Access denied. The Cradle is sealed. You are unauthorized." "What do you mean, unauthorized?" Ross demanded. "The galaxy is under threat," Tom interjected, his voice urgent. "There must be a way to override the protocol. The Guardians sent us here." The AI hesitated again, as if considering. Finally, it responded. "Authorization requires genetic verification. Present the key." Tom and Ross exchanged confused looks. "The key? What is it talking about?" Ross asked. Before anyone could answer, Jack, who had been scanning the surrounding structures, spoke up. "Admiral, the system's defensive platforms are powering up." On the screen, dozens of the orbital constructs began to move, their weapons locking onto the Starseeker. "They think we're intruders," Tom said. "Shields up," Ross ordered. The Starseeker lurched as the first salvo struck, but its shields held. Tom's mind raced. The Guardians must have intended for them to reach this place, but without the key, they were as helpless as anyone else. "Wait!" Tom shouted. "The Guardian fleet, they must have known we wouldn't have the key." "What if?" "What if what?" Ross snapped. "What if it's not a physical object? What if we are the key?" Ross's eyes narrowed. "Explain." The Guardian's message said their technology was built on a different paradigm. What if it's tied to genetics, to finding a compatible species? That would explain why they didn't just destroy us outright. Ross hesitated only a moment. "Fine. Scan me." The scanner activated, its beams sweeping over Ross. A moment later, the voice returned. "Genetic mismatch. Authorization denied." One by one, the bridge crew submitted to scans, but the result was always the same. Finally, Tom stepped forward. The scanner activated, and after a tense pause, the voice returned. "Genetic compatibility detected. Partial authorization granted." The system powered down its weapons, and the voice spoke again. "Proceed to the central structure. The final test awaits." The Starseeker maneuvered carefully toward the massive latticework encasing the star. As they approached, a hangar bay opened, its interior glowing with soft golden light. "Admiral, we're being guided in," Wilson reported. "Let's hope this final test doesn't kill us," Ross muttered. As the ship docked, Tom felt a strange sense of anticipation. He couldn't explain it, but something about this place felt familiar. "Prepare an away team," Ross ordered. "Harker, you're coming with me. Whatever's here, we need to understand it, and fast." As they stepped into the hangar, they were greeted by towering machines, their forms shimmering with barely contained energy. At the far end of the chamber stood a pedestal, its surface inscribed with symbols similar to those on the Guardian ships. Tom approached, his hand hovering over the pedestal. "Whatever this is," he said, "it's been waiting for us." With a deep breath, he placed his hand on the pedestal. The moment Tom's hand touched the pedestal, the entire chamber seemed to come alive. Golden light coursed through the walls, pulsing rhythmically as if echoing a heartbeat. A low hum resonated in the air, vibrating in their bones. "Energy levels are spiking," Wilson reported through the comms. "Admiral, whatever you've activated, it's affecting the entire system." Tom pulled his hand back instinctively, but the pedestal held his palm in place with a soft, invisible force. Symbols swirled on its surface, glowing brighter with each passing second. "Tom?" Ross shouted. "What's happening?" "I don't know," Tom replied, panic in his voice. "It's scanning me." Before anyone could react, a holographic projection filled the chamber. It depicted a swirling galaxy, its edges marked by dark, writhing tendrils, the unmistakable form of the Harbingers. The tendrils spread outward, consuming star systems one by one. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed throughout the chamber. Unlike the AI they had encountered earlier, this voice carried a warmth, almost as if it were alive. Initiating final phase of the Guardian Protocol. Candidate identified. Genetic profile matches 87%. Access granted to Cradle's command systems. The pedestal released Tom's hand, and the light dimmed slightly. He staggered back, breathing heavily. "What does that mean?" he asked. The hologram shifted, now displaying a massive construct deep within the lattice surrounding the star. The voice continued. The Cradle was built to harness the power of the star. This energy can be weaponized to neutralize the Harbingers. However, the activation sequence requires direct neural integration. Only a compatible candidate may proceed. Ross stepped forward, his voice sharp. "Are you saying someone has to connect to this thing? To what end?" "Neural integration will allow the candidate to wield the Cradle's energy. This power will amplify the Guardian's defenses and deploy an interstellar barrier to contain the Harbingers. Without activation, this system will fall." Tom exchanged a glance with Ross. "What's the catch?" The voice hesitated, as if weighing its response. "Integration is irreversible. The candidate's consciousness will merge with the Cradle, becoming its eternal guardian." The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Tom's chest tightened as he stared at the pedestal. "You're asking for a sacrifice," Ross said, his tone bitter. "This isn't a solution, it's a death sentence. The Cradle requires a sentient mind to function," the voice replied. "Without integration, its systems cannot adapt to the Harbinger's evolving threat. The candidate's essence will remain, guiding the defense for all future conflicts." Jack stepped forward, his face pale. "Tom, you can't seriously be considering this. There has to be another way." Tom shook his head, his gaze fixed on the hologram of the Harbingers consuming the galaxy. "Do we have a choice? If we don't stop them here, there won't be a galaxy left to save." Ross placed a firm hand on Tom's shoulder. "Listen to me, Harker. We can find another solution. We'll bring in reinforcements. Rally the fleet, there's no time, Admiral," Tom interrupted. "You've seen what the Harbingers can do. The Guardians gave us this chance for a reason. If we don't use it, we'll lose everything." Ross's grip tightened, his expression conflicted. He had spent his career making impossible decisions, but this was something else entirely. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Ross asked quietly. Tom nodded, his resolve hardening. "I won't let the galaxy fall on my watch." As Tom stepped back toward the pedestal, the holographic voice spoke again. "Candidate confirmed. Proceed to the core for final integration." A section of the chamber's wall slid open, revealing a glowing corridor that led deeper into the Cradle. The light was warm and inviting, yet it carried an undeniable sense of finality. Ross followed Tom to the entrance. "You don't have to do this, Harker," he said, his voice almost pleading. Tom turned, offering a faint smile. "Maybe not, but I'm the only one who can." Before Ross could reply, Tom stepped through the doorway. The walls shimmered as they closed behind him, sealing him inside. The corridor led to a spherical chamber at the heart of the Cradle. In its center floated a massive crystalline structure pulsating with energy. Tom approached cautiously, feeling its power draw him in. The voice returned, softer this time. "Place your hands on the core. The integration process will begin." Tom hesitated, his mind racing with memories of his family, his friends, and the life he was about to leave behind. But as he looked into the swirling energy of the core, he felt a strange sense of peace. "This is bigger than me," he whispered. "Bigger than all of us." With a deep breath, he placed his hands on the core. The Guardian awakes the moment Tom made contact. The crystalline structure flared with blinding light. His mind was flooded with images, star systems, ancient battles, the Harbinger's relentless advance. He felt the weight of millennia, the collective knowledge of the Guardians pouring into him. Outside the Cradle, the Starseeker's crew watched in awe as the entire system lit up. The lattice surrounding the star began to rotate, its energy focusing into a brilliant beam that shot outward, carving a path through the void. "Admiral, the energy readings are off the scale," Wilson reported. "The Cradle. It's building some kind of barrier." Around the galaxy, ancient Guardian outposts sprang to life, their dormant systems activating in unison. A massive, glowing field began to spread from the Cradle, forming an impenetrable barrier that pushed the Harbingers back toward the galactic edge. On board the Harbinger vessel, the alien entity paused as its tendrils encountered the barrier. It recoiled, its movements erratic, before vanishing into the darkness. Back in the Cradle, Tom's body faded, his consciousness merging fully with the system. Through the lattice, he felt the galaxy, its stars, its people, its fragile beauty. He was no longer just Tom Harker. He was the Guardian. Epilogue: Starseeker drifted in silence, its crew staring at the now dormant Cradle. Ross stood on the bridge, his expression a mix of sorrow and awe. "Tom did it," Jack said quietly. "He stopped them." Ross nodded, his voice heavy. "He saved us all." As the ship prepared to return to known space, Ross looked back at the glowing lattice. Somewhere within, Tom's essence remained, watching over the galaxy. But deep in the void, beyond the barrier, the Harbingers stirred. They had been stopped for now. And the Guardian waited, ready for the day they would return.